once again. Here I am in Clyde, Texas at one of the little parks here. Much better than in my bedroom where, you know, the videos just didn't work so well. I've tried to answer questions on several occasions and upload the videos to YouTube, and they just wouldn't take. So I've got my little Vivitar DVR 410 here that took me, about 3 years to finally learn how to take a video. So that's what we're doing today. There was a question that was posed to me about what it was that occurred to make me choose to walk in the faith, and what kind of things led up to it. I guess it's probably best just to give my whole life story here, you know, which may take a couple videos, but I hope that it'll be interesting, and everything I'm going to tell you is true. Though it's quite bizarre, it's absolutely true. When I was young, I was firstborn actually. I weighed 10 pounds 10 ounces. I was born in Rome, New York, and I was swapped in the hospital to another lady that they unswapped us, of course, so they say, you know, but who knows. And the child that went home with the woman had died like 2 weeks after the child was born. There was a crack in the window where I was supposed to be next to the cradle, and he acquired pneumonia, and he died. And from that time, things never got better for me at all. And in fact, my life has been quite a mess. I've had one failure after the other. Everything I put my hand to was kind of like that God that touched things and it would turn to gold. Well, I touched things and it turned to crapola. To the point that later, just about 4 or 5 years ago, I had invested in the worm business because I figured, well, if everything I touch and everything I took an endeavor to, you know, try to succeed in, you know, failed miserably, why not get into the manure business? You know, the worms, the manure, and all that kind of stuff, which I did do. We were doing really well. I went around, had all kinds of orders for manure, had all kinds of orders for fishing worms and things of that sort. And then one day we had this terrible storm came through, and my children came in the house after the storm and said, "Daddy, we can't find any of the chickens." And of course we had several hundred chickens, and we were always successful with that, though a lot of them got eaten by mountain lions and dogs and other varmints, you know, skunks and coons and possums, things of that sort. And even, not eagles, but hawks would come down and carry them way up in the air and drop them down, and then they swoop down and eat them. But that day we couldn't find a single chicken, and it was quite amazing. Didn't even hear a sound out of them. And it was like, man, and a couple of the doors on the chicken coops had been blown off. It was like, man, where did these chickens go? So I went out around the yard, and I went to my greenhouse, and the door was jarred open, about that far, maybe. And I opened the door up all the way, because the wind had blowed it off, you know, or opened away. So I opened up the rest of the way, and there were all these chickens just laying around the ground where I had all my worm buckets sitting out there, you know, growing my worms. And every one of them was tipped over, all the contents poured out in the ground. We couldn't find one worm, and we couldn't find a single egg. So there you have it. My manure business turned to crapola as well. So, but anyway, you know, when I was young, you know, it's kind of like the Sixth Sense movie. A lot of people don't like to hear it, don't like to hear about it, but it's true just the same. I was visited by the dead ever since I can remember. When I was in diapers, my mother came in one day with a baby bottle to feed me, and in those days we didn't have plastic, we had glass. And she dropped it and it smashed all over the floor. And she screamed with this blood-curdling scream, made me cry. I didn't know what was going on. I'm screaming, she's screaming. But what she was screaming over was she noticed that the little spelling blocks, the alphabet blocks, I guess you could call them, the little wood blocks with the alphabet on them, they were stacked up in various ways, and they said, "Change my diaper, I'm dirty," or something like that. There was always a different saying, you know, "Hello, Mom, can I have a cracker?" You know, all these different things. And I watched those that put the blocks up in such a fashion, but my mom she never really understood it or believed it until I was, I say I was probably about 17 years old when an event actually occurred that I was scared to death in her bedroom, and I was freaking out. I never said the F-bomb in front of my mom in my entire life except for that one day. And I said, this whole effing house is going crazy. It's going effing crazy. And she's like, what are you talking about? But anyway, we'll get into that some other time. What I wanted to tell you about was a vision that I had several years after I had already left the Army. And that was back in 1981 I got out. I joined in 1978. I served until 1981. I got out. I lived a life of sin for, a couple years. At the same time, I'm reading the Scriptures, mind you, but I didn't see what I was doing was sinful because I didn't even know what sin really was. I thought that the laws and commandments were just old stories because that's what I was taught as being a Catholic, and I also went to other Pentecostal churches and such with my uncle during that time, and I always heard the same story. Those laws are done away with, the commandments, you can't keep them, that's just old stories, this, that, the other thing, which was basically a pack of lies. I didn't know it at the time, so I endeavored deeply into sin, and everything I put my hand to do, I did with all my heart. So I was probably a chief of sinners. And then one day, I was in my mother's basement, I believe, my mom and dad's house in New York, Durhamville, New York, and in the bottom we had a basement, and that's where I lived. I chose to live there because it was cool. My dad had taken old barn siding, and we cut it, and we put a half wall all the way around the bricks that were down there, and then we painted the walls and everything, and it looked really great. We had old antique tools hanging up all over the place, and it was just a place where I could sit and study, read my Scriptures without being interrupted. And one day, I don't know if it was a vision or just somebody talking to me, but it was rather peculiar, and what it told me was that I was to leave my house and leave my land and go find gold and build my father's house with it. Well, here I was, working at the job that I had at the time. I was working at a milk co-op in New York, and I was making some pretty decent money. It's the best job I ever had, and I was really busting my butt to make that money, working all the overtime and everything I could, and I heard that vision, that I was to leave my father's house and the land and go find gold and build my father's house with it. Well, that's exactly what I did. Of course, I didn't leave too soon, and it ended up that I became one that contacted the first case of occupational asthma linked to hydrogen peroxide at 35%. I was in a NLL room. NNL stood for this machine that, it looked like an octopus, with two sets of 8 arms that went around and around, and they were square, were the milk cartons. They used to have, and I probably still do, the cardboard cartons, but it would attach the cardboard carton to the arm. The bottoms would fold over, a heating pad would hit it, melt the wax, then it would put it on this conveyor belt, which would go up through this little cabinet, and there were these little arms that would shoot hydrogen peroxide at 35% into each and every one of the cartons. It would go through this little heater box, and that would evaporate all the hydrogen peroxide out prior to being filled with the milk, or the half and half, the cream, whatever that we were running at the time. And the problem was there was only a little hole, 2 little holes where we had these 2 conveyor belts that went outside the room. They spun around, came down, where workers would go ahead and package them into the cartons, and then they'd be stacked up on skids and shipped out. But that's the only air passage that we had, was these 2 little holes through this glass window pane that the cartons went out. And the whole place was encased in glass. And I was breathing those fumes, and I found it very hard to breathe. My hair turned as white as it is right now. Of course, it went back after the hydrogen peroxide once I became ill and they put me out of work. But I was out of work for almost a year before they finally gave me any check at all. It was during the winter time that I was planning on going down to the unemployment office and just freezing to death in the parking lot to make a statement because I was totally fed up with life. I had no money. And the conditions for my being paid the disability, which I never got until like a year later in one lump sum of the whole $3,006 and some odd cents. But if I was to get a job, then I'd be cut off from my disability. If I was to get money from anybody, then I'd have to pay it to them. It was just a big, horrible ball of wax because, of course, I came up with this illness, this disability that nobody else had ever contacted. But then it was later proven that, yes, I did have occupational asthma. I didn't have it before. The hydrogen peroxide had seared my lungs. And anytime it was humid, I couldn't breathe. It was like I was drowning. So anyway, after I got sick and I was going to go down to the parking lot of the unemployment office and just sit there and die during the winter time, my mom had a severe car wreck and she broke her collarbone, got a scar on her forehead. My niece lost a tooth or two, you know, and there was just a bunch of damage done to him, and I was asked to go back to the house and do cooking for my dad and such, and take care of my mom and the family. So I laid aside my plans to just let nature take care of me and put me out of my misery and everybody else's. And I went home with the parents, and I took care of matters there. Well, I had still been very deep into the Scriptures. I was very deep as a sinner. At the time, I was even a warlock, you know, doing all kinds of white magic and things of that sort, burning my candles and all. And that's when the voice had hit me. You know, the vision, the voice, I don't know what you want to call it, telling me I had to leave. And when my check came in, I got a Volkswagen van. I got it fixed up. And in those days, $3,006 or whatever was, you know, quite a nice little sum of money, probably worth about $10,000 today. So I got my van fixed up and everything. I had a friend, Pete Pfeiffer. He offered me half of his business. He was in the appliance business. And I used to help him on the side here and there, but he offered me half of his business, half the value of his house, half of what he had in the bank. Just don't leave. But I couldn't do it, you know. I thanked him wholeheartedly, but it's like, hey, Pete, you know, thing is, man, you know, I don't know what to say. I was told I got to leave and go find gold, so I had ordered these gold pans and sluice from some gold magazines. I did a lot of study on how to find gold, and when spring came around, I had my van all set up, and I said my byes, and I left New York. I was heading toward Colorado, was going to be my first stop, but I was actually on my way to Alaska. I had an older brother that lived up there in Anchorage, still does. And I took off on the road, and I had only like $430 when I left New York for gas and everything else. That was what I was going to be. So I basically made myself homeless. And I took off on the road. Now up outside of Wheeling, West Virginia and Ohio, there was this great big mountain, and it was very curvy. I mean, these drop-offs were thousands of feet down. If you went off the cliff, you'd be hitting the tops of the trees as you went down. And I was driving, it was nighttime. I was having a great time. I was just, you know, so free at the time. I'm going to serve my father, you know, I'm going to find gold, I'm going to build him his house and everything. And I'm going up and around these winding passes, and, well, I had to take a leak. So I slowed down, and I seen this little road that went off, and it came up into this overview, lover's lookout, or whatever you want to call it, but it had a great view of all the mountain range and everything, the valley down below. And as I got closer, I went to turn into the driveway up there, and I spun my steering wheel, but it kept going forward. I'm like, what in the world? So I spun it back around. I had stopped, and I spun it one way, and I'm like, well, what is going? I couldn't figure it out. So I just kept on going, and I went all the way around to all these corners and these bends and everything else, and I finally came out of the mountain down to this flat land where there was a farmhouse over on the right-hand side of the road, and he had this big barn on the left side with kind of a big parking lot, a nice driveway that went in there. And when I got down to the bottom, next to his driveway, I tried to turn in there, and it wouldn't turn, so I just put the van in park, and I got out, and I got up underneath it, and I took a look, and what occurred was my steering box had broke right off the axle, and that's how it works in a Volkswagen van. You've got a solid axle that goes across, and then you got, your pivots for your wheels and everything else, but the steering box is welded right onto that axle, and it had broken off clean. And it was broke off, I don't know how long, but for some reason I didn't die that night. Well, the farmer came out in the morning because I had kicked the tires, to get it over into the driveway, and finally I got it parked, and I wasn't about to wake the farmer up. It was like about 3 o'clock in the morning or so, and I got up in my van and I crashed